group is gonna be our player group with the ID of the temp int, which I'm gonna rename to temp player group ID. Temp player ID. So they make more sense. So what it's gonna do here is it's gonna loop through this player group array here. And then it's gonna go through each player group and pick out every player in it. And all we need to do then is compare the player ID that is passed in parameter to our player ID that we took out of the player group. And if these are equal, then the player is in this player group, so we can just return the player group ID. Alright. And if it is not found, we will return once again -1. You always need a default return at the end, because the function has to return something. If you don't put this thing in, you will get an error when you try to run the map, because it might end up that you send in a player number that is not in any player group, and it will come here, and it won't find it, and it will come to the end, and it don't know what to return. So always put a return at the end of your functions. This should work. So we're going to go back to the button handler. So player team ID, and we're going to simply take our function, get player team ID, and the player is the triggering player. Voila! Now we have the player's team ID. Of course, this could be -1. You should implement a check for that probably. Or as long as you set up the rest of your map properly, that won't happen. But if you plan on distributing it to other people, then you should set up a check to see that it's not -1. If it's -1, you should exit and throw an error, but I'm not going to do that. Instead, what we're going to do now is check if the character has been picked. So we're going to do a comparison here again, and variable, character picked. The first one should be the team. So that's going to be the player team ID. And the second one should be the character, which is the same as the dialog button number. And if that is equal to true, then the character has already been picked for this team. And then all we do is we skip remaining actions. This should not be possible to happen. I'm going to set it up so the buttons disappear after the character has been picked. Now, if we come to after this if then else, that means the character has not been picked for this team. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to pick the character. Character picked here once again. We're going to use the player team ID and dialog item number, character number. We're going to rename it, makes more sense. And we're going to set it to true, so it's been picked for that team. Then obviously you would have your code to create your character, but since I'm not actually doing that, I'm just gonna hide the button for the team. I'm gonna need a new action, because I don't want to access the dialog directly outside of these actions here. Button for team. Parameters, team ID, and sorry, button ID. I'm just gonna leave it like that. Hides the button for the team. And then all we need to do in here is go to dialog here and find hide. Show hide dialog item. Hide dialog item. We go variable. Dialog item is going to be the parameter button ID for players. Once again, teams, and simply the parameter team ID. And that's it. Then the button is hidden for that team. So after it's clicked, everyone in that team is gonna have their button hidden. Sorry. And alright. Then we need to call this function in our button handler. Hide button for team ID, we pass in our player team ID, button ID, we pass in our character number, because that corresponds to the button ID, as we already said. Okay, so this should actually work now. As soon as someone presses a button, that button will be hidden for that team, and you can put your unit spawning code inside here at the bottom, or you could call up another function to do your unit spawning or whatever you want. And you know the character number, and you know the team. You even have the player by using the triggering player, as we do up here. So that should actually work. Let me think to see if there's anything I forgot. Don't think so. I'm gonna have to implement some test functions for this. So the last thing we should do here is obviously hide. We could make a function for this, but I'm lazy, so I'm just gonna hide the dialog. Character selection dialog for player, convert player to player group, and triggering player, so that when you press the button, the dialog disappears for you, and it hides the button for all the other players on your team. Alright, so now we need to implement some testing functions here, and I think the easiest way to do this is to just use screen buttons. Screen buttons are very easy to make, and they're extremely easy to show dialog. Extremely easy to use. Bottom right, I don't care. Callback, I add a new trigger. Test button, callback. And here we take the value, test button, callback. You can only call back the triggers, but that's fine. Screen button ID 1, remember to change this if you have multiple screen buttons. And in here, we just dialog, show hide dialog. Show dialog for all players, that's fine. Alright, so this is ready for testing. This should be done now. I can only test a single player here, but this should be set up for multiple players with multiple teams. So let's just go into the game and test it and see how it works. Alright, here we are in the game. And you will see our dialog with our 3 buttons now, Marine, Tor, and Salad. If I press the Tor, the dialog disappears, but I have this test button to make it show again. And you will see that the Tor button is hidden. It would also be hidden for anyone else on my team. I press Marine, that one disappears, and lastly Salad, and the Salad disappears. So this is the basis of creating a dialog. This was a very specific example for creating a character selections for 2 teams, where each team could pick each character once, but both teams should be able to pick the same character. So yeah, hope you find this useful. If anyone else have any requests, then feel free to come with them. And I'm sorry for the length of this tutorial, but if I'm going to cover everything, the tutorials get a bit longer. Hopefully that's alright. Okay, so that's it for this time. Until next time, have fun.